Good evening. Um, I'm coming to you all with a different topic tonight, a little bit outside of what I generally focus on, but very important information. Specifically, I am talking to Black families and Black families that have property in their generational family lineage. I'm going to tell you a story and then I'm going to kind of expound from the story. So my family has had property in our family for years. My grandparents, specifically my grandfather, purchased a brick home in New York City back in the 50s when they first came to New York City. And that house has been in our family for years. When my grandparents retired, they moved down south. They purchased a home down south and they lived in that home down south until they both passed away. When my grandfather passed away, of course, the home in New York City went to my grandmother. And when my grandmother passed away, she passed away with a will. And she left the home in North Carolina to two of her children, and then she left the home in New York to the other set of children. So my grandparents had 5 children altogether. Each of the children received one of the homes. The home in New York City, of course, was left to my aunt and uncle who were residing in the home in New York City. And so, my family did not think anything of it. The house was willed to them in my grandmother's will, and that was that. A few years ago, we found out that a predatory realty company bought shares in our home in New York City. And so what generally happened is that because of the will, when both my grandparents passed away, then the home becomes transitioned to the heirs. And because the home transitioned to the heirs, what generally is happening with Black families in their homes is that sometimes the realty company, when they recognize that it is a prime property and that it has value, they will move in and talk, siblings into selling their percentage to the realty company. And so that is what ultimately happened. Secondary to that, the realty company owned percentage in my family's home. It wasn't anything that, my aunt that was living in the home was aware of until notice was given that, there was going to be a partition to sell. And so a partition to sell is when someone makes a motion to split the house and sell it and split the profits of the sale to each of the people who has a percentage in the home. And generally this happens because it is not feasible for a court to, split or separate a house down the middle and give each person a piece to live in. And so the most reasonable or feasible decision is that you sell the home and you give each person their percentage. That definitely makes sense when it's family, that can't make a decision on a house and they want to split the house. Totally makes sense. But when you have an individual who enters into someone's home that they own and takes a percentage that they have no rightful ownership to, it becomes a problem. So, that happened and we went through the process. Thankfully, at the time that it was happening, I was also completing law school. And so I have knowledge of property law. And so gratefully, we were able to get those predatory individuals off of the home. And now the home is 100% back owned by the family. And so I want to have this conversation because this is happening a lot across the United States with Black families. This is definitely happening in areas like New York City, like Washington, D.C., where the property is prime, where the value of the property is prime. And these realty companies and corporations know that. And so what they are doing is making very, in my opinion, predatory moves to take over people's homes and to get the value of their homes so that they can then turn around and rent the homes at high values and put people out on the streets. And so one of the things that I want to talk about first and foremost is that keeping in mind that even when your family, your parents, your grandparents have a will, wills can be contested. And then also, if the will wasn't properly recorded or in probate, the will can be argued. And so, one of the things that you want to be mindful of when an individual has a will is to make sure that everything is, documented, notarized, done accurately per the state laws for that state, and then recorded. Another thing, if your family does not have wills or has not created documentation that discuss what should happen to property, if there is an individual who passes away, you need to start to do that immediately so that you can lock it in. The next thing that is really important is that even if you have a will and the will says that the house becomes yours, please make sure that you are creating a deed that transfers that house into your name, that it doesn't still remain in the name of the individual who gifted it to you or made you the beneficiary of that property, because there is no value anymore in that deed. And so what generally can happen is, like what happened in our situation, the realty companies or the corporations that are predatory will turn around, and if they have bought percentage or found a way to get into your home's property, they will record the deed. And so there is different types of deed notices, and one of them is the race notice. And race notice is that the first person who records the deed pretty much has the deed. And that's what happened here, is that they had a deed on our home even though they weren't actually entitled to the house. The second thing that I want to mention is keeping in mind that when you have family members that are gifted or a beneficiary of a property like you are, you all definitely need to have a conversation and put documentation in place that discusses what happens with the home, such as things like no one can sell their percentage without everybody's consent, or putting all of the percentage into the person who the house was actually willed or gifted to. What that is things like doing a quit claim deed, where everybody else's percentage goes into that one person to make that one person 100% owner of the house, and then they file the deed and make sure you record the deed. These are things that can keep predatory corporations and realties out of accessing your home. Next, I want to talk about please being mindful of, checking up on the status of the house as far as property taxes, any liens that are on the house, any second mortgages that may have been taken out on the house. Any of those things can put your house in jeopardy of being taken from you or being predatory in taking from you. And so sometimes these corporations will watch the list, and the list that pops up with property tax liens, and that's the way that they get in. Because if you are behind on your property tax, or your parents were behind on their property taxes and you weren't aware of that, your house can be placed up for foreclosure, or your house can be placed up for a lien, where the likelihood of selling your home can happen to address the property taxes that you owe. And so, like for instance, the house that we own is free and clear, does not have a mortgage. And so these are the risks that happens when you don't have a mortgage on a house. It is easier for corporations that are predatory to slide in, because there is no one that already holds a lien over the house should you default on the mortgage. So again, to keep in mind, making sure that if there is not a will in place, that you all put wills in place, you record those wills, and you make sure the will is notarized and aligned to the laws in your state. If there is a will in place, making sure that the person who is identified as the beneficiary of the property either gets the deed recorded in their name, or make sure that it is going to effectively transfer to them at the time of gifting it. Third, making sure that there are no liens or outstanding property taxes or outstanding loans on your home that would make it easier for predatory individuals to come in. Lastly, I want to say that if this does happen to you, fight it. Do not give up. Go to court, especially if this is your childhood home, because most times what happens is the court will allow factors that takes into account that this home is yours. This is very important.